Let's dive back into PPE and why it's so hard for states to get their hands on more. And we're going to try and explain that stimulus package you keep hearing about in a way that makes sense. There's also some news about the state tax deadline. But first, I wanted to get into something that we hit on in the open of the show, and it's something I know a lot of you have been wondering about. How can states possibly enforce executive orders like the ones Governor Brown and Inslee signed this week, the ones ordering you to stay in your house unless you absolutely have something extremely important to do, like receiving medical care? Well, as far as Portland is concerned, there's one thing the chief of police does not want us doing right now.
It is imperative that people refrain from calling 911 and overloading the emergency system with non-emergency calls for service.
Yeah, and I kind of hope it goes without saying, but just because it's a bad idea for your neighbors to throw a house party right now doesn't necessarily mean that you need to call police or that they need to show up. The city wants you to use the non-emergency line if you really feel like something is out of order. But even then, the police are going to still pick and choose which one qualifies for an actual response. But people like Jean Marie, who wrote in on Facebook, they want to know, now that the stay-at-home order is in place, what kind of actions will be taken against those who break the rules? Well, the governor's office says if you notice a company is violating the executive order, a company in Oregon, you can report them to OSHA, and then OSHA will determine if more action needs to be taken. OSHA's already gotten 400 workplace complaints just since last night. So if you go to pick up food, for instance, and you see a bunch of workers bumping around into each other, working in really close quarters, you can report them. But if you have a personal experience where you feel like someone violated your space or maybe even got you sick, whether it's a stranger or in a business, that call should go to the non-emergency line, not OSHA. I know, it is a little complicated. It's a lot to deal with. Kristen Severance, though, has been answering a bunch of your Hey Dan questions all week. She's going to have a few more of those about how to report violators a little later in the show. Also, be sure to tune in at 7 o'clock because Kristen's been hosting a whole half hour of Q&A, a Q&A special every day to get to all the questions that we don't necessarily get around to doing here. Okay, now back to here in this show, the story. Governor Brown's executive order also laid out the punishment people could face if they violate the order. It's a Class C misdemeanor. That comes with up to 30 days in jail or $1,250 fine or both. But Portland Police, Salem Police, police in Washington, they've all said that their priority right now is not to give people tickets or throw them in jail. It's to teach us what we should and should not be doing, how to do this correctly, but also to educate the most vulnerable people in our community who don't have a home to go to.
We also understand that many of our homeless community may not be aware of the health crisis or the orders, which is why it is important for us to take an educate first approach.
As for the crisis our healthcare workers are facing, believe it or not, we actually have some good news to report about PPE. That's personal protective equipment. Major local employers, Nike and Intel, they're both stepping up to make or donate PPE. Nike confirms it's putting the finishing touches right now on a prototype for face shields, and they're collaborating with OHSU to make sure this is the gear that the workers actually want. Intel is donating 1 million pieces from their own emergency stockpile, which apparently they have. Who knew? They're joining national companies like 3M and Ford, ramping up production of PPE. Now soak in that good news, because now comes the bad part. Governors across America, including Kate Brown, say that even with all these companies stepping up, states are having a very hard time getting all of the products that they need, and Oregon needs it badly. The Oregonian just reported the state has used up almost all of its emergency stockpile. All the gowns are gone and most of the masks are gone. Maggie Vespa reports now on why it's so hard to get more.
The latest shipment of supplies to come in from the feds only covered 25% of what Oregon requested, says Governor Kate Brown. It arrived yesterday. In the background, she says bidding wars are being waged.
Every state in the U.S. is competing to secure these scarce products, and we're also competing against the federal government. Several governors spoke about the fact that they were in the process of acquiring additional masks, and the federal government came in, FEMA came in and purchased those masks underneath them.
It's the same complaint Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker made on the Today Show this week, and he added this.
We were bidding against foreign countries and other states. And so what's happening to not just on ventilators, but on all the PPE that we need, prices are being ratcheted up.
Tonight, both governors' calls to the White House grow louder, demanding, among other things, the president invoke the Defense Production Act. Under it, he could order American companies to produce more PPE and other goods needed to fight the virus. Plus, the act would give the feds power to issue specific legal guidance on the standards of those products and decide where they go. AKA, it would end the bidding wars and speed up delivery of the products to states and hospitals who need them. President Trump has said he does not want to invoke the act. He told states to look to the free market, adding he doesn't have to order companies to produce these products because they're doing so on their own.
They've already run out of disposable face shields and have switched to sort of a mask similar to what you might see in a wood shop.
Amid all of this, local healthcare workers say they're scared. Yesterday, I spoke with a rep for the Oregon Nurses Association who connected me with a nurse on the state's coast. KGW verified her identity, but interviewed her anonymously because she was afraid she'd be reprimanded for speaking out. Her full story is up now at kgw.com. She talked about having to reuse an N95 mask designed to be used once 5 times and keep it in a Rubbermaid container. She told me she's never felt more vulnerable, adding she doesn't want to bring the virus home to her husband, adding, I don't want to take it out in the community. Heaven forbid.
Maggie Vespa joining us now. Maggie, seems like quite a mess.
Yeah, Dan, definitely. I mean, these governors, at least in their perspective, they're really, really frustrated. You know, Oregon Governor Kate Brown actually said today she called Vice President Mike Pence to tell him and her take on all of this and what she wants to change. And if nothing else, she says all that bidding and purchasing is just delaying getting this needed equipment to the doctors and nurses who, at least here in Oregon, say they don't have time to waste, as we've reported.
Now, what about the companies making this stuff? I mean, are they having discussions about this clearly? What are they saying?
So our local ones are at least speaking to how they expect to get their product out. Nike, for one, should point out, is being pretty tight-lipped about the prototype itself and when they expect to release it. But there was an article in Business Insider where Nike execs said they are going to prioritize getting the face shield that they're making to Oregon healthcare workers, because remember they partnered with OHSU on this, and they've done that before on other projects. Intel, for its part, is donating its PPE products. They're not selling it. And in a press release, they wrote they're working with local health authorities and government agencies around the world to disperse those. I did ask for more info on what exactly that means, which agencies, how that might go. And a spokesperson for Intel told me she doesn't know at this point, but we'll let you know if and when we get that info, Dan.
All right, Maggie Vespa, we know you're on top of this for us. Thank you so much. Now, it turns out, well, I learned something today. I'm sure you didn't know this either, but most hospital equipment can also be used on humans. Well, maybe you did know that. Like this ventilator here that Dove Lewis loaned to a hospital in Spokane. It's the only ventilator Dove Lewis has, but they say they only use it about once a month. There's a national veterinary organization collecting information right now from animal clinics across the country to see if they can loan their equipment to human hospitals.
And just to see their voluntary efforts to come together, to collaborate with each other, to try to organize this is just, it's just wonderful to see. So not only are we trying to do things at our own hospitals to keep things safe, but we're also trying to think about the national shortage and the national effort. So that's where, again, I'm just so proud to be a veterinarian and especially a critical care specialist in this time.
We also learned that an animal hospital in Vancouver loaned its ventilator to a human hospital. Now let's talk about that $2 trillion stimulus package that Congress is pretty close to passing that would set aside about $100 billion for hospitals. As for the $1.9 trillion other dollars, here's roughly how it's expected to break out, assuming Congress again actually passes it. Here are the bits that could work for people who are out of work. 13 weeks extension of unemployment benefits, guaranteeing 4 months of full salary for people who lost their jobs. And the one that you've all probably heard about already is the direct payments of $1,200 for everyone who makes up to $75,000 a year based on their 2018 filings. After $75,000, you get a little less, and then after $99,000, you don't get anything at all. Each child also gets $500. I know a lot of you have been wondering whether that $1,200 will be taxed. Two viewers, Tom Mitchell and Robert, they both asked similar versions of that question using the hashtag #HeyDan. We took that question to a state economist, and he says, no, we won't have to pay federal taxes on that stimulus money. He doesn't quite know if we're going to have to pay state tax on that either, unless the Oregon legislature decides for some reason that they want to do that, but that's down the line. The stimulus bill would also help out small businesses with loans. The package sets aside $350 billion for this. Companies that keep their workers would receive money, and companies that pay their workers through this crisis will have the loan forgiven. The Senate is expected to vote on this plan tonight. It has bipartisan support and support of President Trump, who urged the House to pass it too. Senator Merkley summed things up nicely in our quote of the day. In his statement about the stimulus, he wrote, "We must realize that any choice between our lives and our livelihoods is a false choice. We cannot have one without the other." We are living through history right now, and the Oregon Historical Society wants your story to be part of it. Matt Zaffino is going to tell us how the coronavirus pandemic is making it even harder to forecast the weather. And how about a round of applause for all the healthcare workers out there when the story continues.
Okay, time to answer another viewer question. So this one is specific, but it's really interesting. This viewer says, I have been homesick with all the assumed COVID-19 symptoms for 5 days now. The breathing difficulties have not yet reached a critical condition, so I followed the advice of a phone doctor, and they're just staying at home trying to get through this. The person says, since testing was not available, is there a way I could ever tell if I had the virus or not at a later date to know for sure if I have any kind of immunity? All right, so doctors say the way we can tell if a person is immune to something is by looking for antibodies in their blood. There is work being done on an antibody test for this virus and will probably be used eventually to identify people who are immune. That said, doctors say we just don't know how long that immunity will last. Maybe a year, maybe forever. We just don't know. Please keep sending in those questions using the hashtag #HeyDan. All right, let's answer some viewer questions. So this viewer says, hey Dan, how can people report businesses that remain open that are on the mandatory COVID-19 stay-at-home closure list according to Governor Brown? Thank you, Jen, for that question. There are several ways to do this. You can file a report with OSHA online at osha.oregon.gov, and we put that on our website. If you're in Portland, you can also call the Portland Police Bureau's non-emergency line, and you can also reach out to BOLI, which I know makes most people think of pizza, but it really stands for the Bureau of Industry and Labor here in Oregon. Please keep sending in these questions using the hashtag #HeyDan.
Makes people think of pizza. Is she thinking of Boboli? Boboli? Is that how you pronounce it? Is that an East Coast thing? Some people were telling me that's an East Coast thing. Well, if you're from the East Coast, it probably makes you think of pizza. Kristen, thank you. We appreciate that. Keep the questions coming. Use that hashtag #HeyDan. We answer as many as we can. And again, Kristen is back answering as many more as she can at 7 o'clock in a special half hour. So if your question doesn't get answered here in the story, it's probably going to get addressed there. One question we've been hearing a lot that we finally do have an answer to comes from Kathleen Kokanen and a lot of other people. You wanted to know, hey Dan, is Oregon going to delay filing day for taxes to match federal? Well, Kathleen, the governor, has an answer for you from this morning's teleconference call with the news media.
We have agreed to allow extension for personal filing until July 15th, and we are going to continue the deadlines for those making estimated payments.
So there you hear it. You have until July 15th, just like federal taxes. We're still waiting to hear back from the city about local taxes like the arts tax. We can't tell you, though, that a city spokesperson told us that assuming the Department of Revenue mirrors federal extensions, which we now know that it does, the new filing and payment deadline for the arts tax is anticipated to be July 15th. Again, that is not official. We can't say it's official right now, but we have a pretty good idea where the city is going. Here is something that we believe is worth your time, and we're actually going to be digging into the vault for this one too. It's kind of a twofer. The Willamette Week has a story about the arrival of the 1918 Spanish flu in Portland and how the city responded to it then. And like the headline says, it is eerily familiar to what we're kind of going through now. Schools were closed, the state set up a makeshift hospital, people started making their own face masks, leaders encouraged social distancing, everyone was told to wash their hands over and over again. And in the end, the healthcare system was overwhelmed and nearly 3,700 Oregonians died. Earlier today, I chatted with the local historian who wrote the piece, Doug Kenk-Crispin.
Did anything surprise you when you compared the two events, any of the correlations between the Spanish influenza and what we're experiencing today?
Well, I think the one thing that jumped out at me is just kind of this kind of careless attitude that Portlanders seem to have in a lot of ways. You know, I think that the correlation between the two situations is that people don't really want to be told what to do and told to stay home. You know, you see a lot of activity in 1918 when this is really ramping up that's kind of reminiscent of, you know, the lines of people in their cars this last weekend heading out to the Oregon coast.
He also talked about how Portland's mayor at the time, George Baker, didn't really want to shut the city down because he was worried about the impacts on the economy. He eventually did close schools and theaters, but Portlanders could still go out to pool halls and bowling alleys and stuff like that. They were just asked to stay 4 feet apart. You can watch the rest of my conversation with Doug on KGW's YouTube page. Now to the reason that we know all those details about the Spanish flu in Portland is because it was documented. So the Oregon Historical Society is working to do just that now with the pandemic that we're experiencing, and they actually really want your help. As they put it, we are experiencing something right now that practically no one on earth has experienced before. So they want you to share your story with them. How are you spending your days while shut inside? Do you know anyone with the disease, or do you yourself have it? Has your life changed in any way? What should future generations remember about this time? You can submit your story on their website. We got a link for you at kgw.com.
Everybody, I'm Matt Safino, and of course broadcasting from home, working from home like so many of us are, and will continue to do. And of course I set my camera up in my backyard, and right as I did, there was this little sprinkle, but the sky actually looks pretty good. You know what's missing from the sky? Not completely, but partially. Airliners and airplanes. There aren't nearly as many flights as there are. Now, that's not to say nobody's flying. Take a look at this map from Flight Radar 24, and you can see there's plenty of flights out there, certainly across the continental U.S., over to Hawaii and over to Asia as well. But there's not as many as there used to be. And you know what those flights do besides carrying people and cargo? They collect weather data. And those weather observations that the airliners take are fed into our computer models and help make our weather forecasts better. So, will there be a decrease in the accuracy of our forecast because the models aren't getting as much data? Well, I posted an article on KGW.com saying that yes, there was after 9/11. Of course, nobody was flying then. This isn't quite as severe as that. But again, we're seeing fewer observations being fed into the models. Now, it's not all lost. The models are better than they used to be back in 2001. And we have other sources of data. We have satellite data for local models. We have radar data. But again, it's interesting that because of the COVID virus and because of the quarantines that are happening, we are going to see a little bit of a degradation of the quality of the forecast coming out of our computer models, interestingly enough. However, you can always rely on me and my 7-day forecast, which is going to bring you sunshine tomorrow after the morning fog. We're still looking at rain this weekend, but better days next week as we head into April. Dan, back to you.
See you as well. Nice to see you, big guy. All right, so we're going to take a little break from the coronavirus coverage and get to some other stories that may have gotten lost in the headlines in a segment we like to call In Other News. In other news, a Washington state trooper was killed after being hit by a driver who was trying to get away from police. It happened last night on I-5 near Chehalis. Trooper Justin Schaefer was putting spike strips on the road when he was hit. The driver was arrested after the chase. Schaefer was a state trooper for 7 years and was the son of the Chehalis police chief. Plans for a memorial service have not been released yet. Clackamas County Sheriff's deputies rescued 4 people and their dogs yesterday after they got stuck in the snow in the mountains. The group was camping in the forest and were following their GPS on Highway 224 to Detroit. Another driver called in for help. Deputies were able to tow the SUV out of the snow. The case of missing Portland boy Kyron Horman will be featured on In Pursuit with John Walsh tonight. Kyron disappeared from Skyline Elementary School in Northwest Portland in 2010 when he was 7 years old. His stepmother took him to school, but he never made it to his second grade class. Despite massive search efforts and an ongoing investigation, no arrests have been made. The show focuses on missing children and fugitives and encourages viewers to submit tips. It airs tonight at 10 on Investigation Discovery. And that's in other news. All right, when we come back after the break, typically we read some comments, but tonight I'm going to try something different. I'm about to hop on Facebook Live. So if you want to get on, chat with me after we get off the air. We'll show you a little bit about how we're doing things around KGW. I'd love to talk to you. So hop on Facebook Live on my Facebook page or on the KGW Facebook page. You can find it there. We're also going to show you some of the folks who are saying thank you to those fighting this from the front lines when the story continues.
All right, one more viewer question. This person says, hey Dan, can my housekeeper continue to come and clean if I leave the house? Thank you, Jeff R. Okay, our doctor says that's really not advisable. Leaving the house when the person arrives and staying away for 3 to 4 hours is a good idea if you absolutely need to have someone come in for something. But the doctor says a housekeeper moves all over your house. They touch pretty much everything. And there is a risk to the housekeeper as well as the homeowner. Even with gloves, there are risks. So let's say the housekeeper puts on gloves and gets to cleaning, touches their face, wipes their nose, keeps on cleaning, feeling safe because they have on gloves. Gloves get dirty just like hands do. And if the housekeeper is not infected, but the virus is in the home, now that person is at risk. So our doctor says, do not do it. Please keep sending in those questions using the hashtag HeyDan. The producers will not let me use Hey Kristen at this time, but I'm working on it.
You know what? She's my wife. She's already anchoring the 4 and the 7, and now she's coming after my show, but that's why I love her. So we've been sending a lot of you the thank yous to everyone on the front lines of this pandemic, but we've been virtually thanking you because of social distancing and all of that. But this week, the medical staff at OHSU got a huge round of applause in person from the Mirabella retirement community on the South Waterfront. Take a look. These are the moments we talk about, the Historical Society collecting these moments. I mean, these are the moments in history I think are going to stick out for a long time when kids who are my son's age, 3 years old, grow up and start realizing what they lived through. In the meantime, typically we do comments instead. I'm on Facebook Live right now. So if you're on Facebook Live, you're on Facebook Live and on TV while being on Facebook Live. But if you want to be just on Facebook Live and not on Facebook Live and TV at the same time, when I'm off TV, I'll just be on Facebook Live. So I will see you then. That made sense, right? That's the story. See you next time.